Welcome to A Learner's Journey. My name is Molly Sanders, and the goal of this podcast is to inspire and motivate you by connecting you with a variety of passionate horsewomen and men who have dedicated their lives to helping horses and their people. I'm grateful you're here. Welcome to the latest episode of the podcast. Today you're going to get to hear a conversation that I had with a horsewoman named Libby Lyman. I found out about Libby last year when I interviewed Tom Moates. You may have heard that interview. And after the conversation that I had with Tom, I asked him who he would like to hear interviewed, and he gave me a list of names, and Libby was one of them. So I contacted her and she agreed, and we had a wonderful conversation. Libby has loved and worked with horses her whole life. She's spent a significant amount of time working and learning with both Joe Walter and Harry Whitney, and she incorporates that learning into her teaching today. Her enthusiasm for learning and sharing is contagious. I think you'll find that in this interview ahead. She's also dedicated to setting things up in a way for horses to feel good interacting with her and to use their natural ability to think in their search for an answer. In this conversation, she shares with us the experiences that shaped her into the horsewoman that she is today. We'll also get to hear about an intriguing idea that she learned years ago from Harry Whitney and then took it and practiced it on many, many horses and taught it to many, many people. It's called the free search, and its purpose is to help the human really understand how much horses can think and figure things out on their own. And lastly, she shares a way of looking at fear that I had never considered, and I think you'll find interesting. I hope you find many nuggets for your own horsemanship in this conversation. Thanks for being here. My first question usually is, how did you get started with horses?
Well, I had a mother who loved horses. And apparently when I popped out, my first word was horse. My first picture was drawing a horse. And I don't remember the first time I was on a horse, but she has told me the story of the first time I got on a horse, which was one that her best friend couldn't get broke to ride. And so we kind of shared a campsite that our families had bought side by side. And so when they were out on the sailboat, my mother took the horse out and plopped me on him.
The one that couldn't get broke to ride?
Free. And of course, I was just ecstatic and didn't care. And he could feel whatever he could feel. I was just this little harmless thing that wasn't trying to tell him what to do.
Wow.
So he didn't care at all. Yeah. So I love that story as my first ride, but I don't remember it.
Oh, that's great. That's great. You've been able to talk to your mom about that story, obviously, because she's told it to you.
Yes. Yes.
Have you ever questioned her? What were you thinking putting me on that horse?
Always. And then when I learned more about starting horses, I said, Ma, what were you thinking? And she said, oh, I knew he'd be fine.
Oh, wow.
Wow. But she didn't just plop me up there and leave me. She put her arm around me, and
Sure.
slid me up there and slid me off and slid me up there and slid me off until he didn't care. And then and left me up there to hang on for a second and went from there. And I rode him a bunch, apparently.
Wow.
He'd lead me around on him for a bit. Yeah.
Oh, that's really wild.
I know.
Yeah. So then what happened from there? What are some of your earliest memories?
Yes. Well, she made friends with a local family that had a bunch of horses and did not the husband, the father knew how to ride, but he was busy being a father and working for a living. And so got together with my dad and my dad said, hey, my wife would really like to do something with horses. And he said, well, if she wants to come out and teach all the kids how to ride, then you guys can use all the horses. So we had, I think there were 4 or 5 horses that we used, and all of us kids learned how to ride. And my mother taught us all, and we played games and we rode all over the place. And I mean, it was really fun
that's great. And that's such a great blend. The person that owns the horses that wants someone else to, ride them. And so you don't have that commitment right out of the gates. That's great. That's
Yeah.
really neat.
We didn't get my
So,
first horse till till I was 12, and then we
oh, okay.
brought them home, and then we had horses here for a while till I
That's
went over.
great. That's great. And
Yeah.
by that point, you knew, your parents knew, you knew that you
Oh,
wanted your
yes.
own. Yeah.
My mother and I were passionate about dressage, and she gave me Riding Logic, Muessler's book, and Podolsky's book, The Complete Training of the Horse and Rider, and she used to read them to me as kids as bedtime stories.
Wow. Oh, wow. And do you remember, like, did you enjoy that or was
Oh,
it?
we worked so hard on it. We loved it. Oh, I was
Wow.
totally nuts about
Oh, that's so
all
great.
of it from the very beginning. Yeah,
'Cause
really.
I'm not familiar with those books, but I would
Yeah.
guess they're not the most entertaining to
No,
read.
not at all.
No.
It's really hard.
Oh, that's really neat. That's a really neat
Yeah.
story. So then how did the professional side of it come in for you? When did you know that you wanted to take it on professionally?
Oh, when I was 6, probably.
Wow.
I mean, I can't remember not wanting it to be my profession. But that said, I did a lot of other things as well, because the nature of life is I spent enough time in big barns that I knew that burnout was a very big problem for people. By the time I was 18, I knew that was a problem for people. So I did a bunch of other jobs first. And
So tell us a little bit, more about that. Like what were you seeing that was leading to burnout? And was it like a competitive barn that you were in? What was?
I was a working student for a full year, and then summers for several years in high school for Mike Poulin. And it was her early in his career, and he and his brother, and they were working like fiends all day, all night. I mean, just all the time, and didn't have 2 pennies to rub together. And I thought, I don't see how you can endure this. And I don't see how you can really get where you want to be and
That's
still
really
love
great.
the horses. Yeah.
Yeah. And you said you were around 18?
I was 16. I was 14 when I first started going.
Okay.
And I was 8. I was between high school and college. I spent a year being a working student.
That's really insightful, because I think that a lot of young people see examples like that and think that's the way that you do it. And
well, it is one way.
Yeah, it is one way, right? But instead of looking at it like you did, where you're like, that isn't really the way I want to do it. That doesn't look sustainable. It doesn't look healthy. That's pretty insightful.
Yeah, and I love horses. Yeah, I mean, from the time I was little, it's not just I love riding horses. I love horses.
Right.
And I could not see how you could keep that feeling and turn over as many horses as you need to turn over.
Right.
I didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
I when they come to me, they're here for life. And well, you can't, that's not sustainable as a professional.
No.
So
that's a large barn.
That was not gonna, and no money, right? Like, how are we all gonna eat?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so tell us a little bit about like so you knew that you didn't want to follow the how do you say the last name? Michael Poulin. I'm not familiar with him.
Oh, he's still teaching and
okay. And dressage.
In dressage, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. How did you balance it? What did you
it was a big mess. Okay. So I promised my parents before I went to be a working student that I would go to college. So I got into Bennington, and I applied for deferred enrollment, and I majored in sculpture.
Interesting.
So yes. So then I got out of college, and I thought, okay, now what do I do? Horses and sculpture, neither one makes very good money. So I proceeded to try to have a job of some sort, and a job that doesn't pay much when you don't have skills that fit business worlds. So I sewed bags for a living for a bag shop, and I worked, and then I went back to school for a secretarial science degree, and I didn't really need that, but it did sort of give me some skills, and I got a job working for a office equipment company, which oddly enough was one of the really important pieces of learning to teach well, because for some reason, I'd already been teaching for years. I started teaching when I was 14. I helped my mother with her art classes, and I taught writing here at home and at Poland's. They figured out that so I was just always teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I got into that equipment company, and their secretaries were learning about electronic typewriters. Do you know how scary it is for an older lady who has typed and cut and paste and done her job on an old manual typewriter her whole life to suddenly be told she's supposed to type into this thing that she can't really see it, and then it's going to print out? And I had to teach them. I had to go around to businesses and teach them. And I quickly learned that if I told them too much, they just shut down. They couldn't take it and they'd panic.
Right.
And so I had to give them just one little thing that they could see would really help them. And then they'd get excited about that.
Right.
And they'd work, and then I'd go back and I'd help them again. And pretty soon they were pretty happy with their machine.
Right.
But I couldn't just shove it all in their face. So it was a interesting twist.
That is really interesting, and that's so neat that you learned it there, because that's been something for me that I really struggled with. I used to teach for many years. I taught elementary school for many years, and then I was a horsemanship instructor for 12 years, and I know that concept of just give a little. But boy, that's hard for me, because I want people to, get their money's worth, and but it does impede the feeling of success. Right. Because you can't soak all that in. It's got to just be one thing.
Yeah. Or it might be a few things, but you can't overdo it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Do you find the same with horses, or is that a different type of teaching?
It's a little bit different, but it's not completely different, because it has to do with their temperament.
Right.
So some horses will learn as fast as someone can teach them. They're much more in the moment, so they stay with what's happening.
Right.
But they can get overwhelmed and fearful from too much information, just like we can.
Right.
But they don't hold on to it quite in the same way unless it's repetitive.
Right.
And then that becomes an expectation, and so they won't open up anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about, we're going to kind of go off on a tangent here, but this will be good. So with horses that you've interacted with, because you've now, this has been your life's work. This is what you've done your whole life. With horses that you come into contact with that have been overwhelmed in a learning setting, they've just kind of shut down and learned that people don't really have answers. What do you find is important for them to bring them back out?
Time.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's where your free search question is going to come in.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Good. So we'll come back to this.
Yeah.
But is there anything else that you'd want to say?
Well, they are afraid to try.
Okay.
That horses by nature are thinkers, and they're genetically programmed to figure stuff out. That's how they survive, right? And we take that away. And when that's been taken away, you got to give it back.
Interesting. Okay. I'm super excited to get to the free search question. And actually, why don't we do that? And I'll come back to some of the other questions that I've got. So I found out about you through Tom Moates, who I interviewed a couple months back. And after we were done, we had a really fun conversation, and then we kept talking. And I asked him, who would you want to hear interviewed? And it's a really great question, because I've ended up getting a lot of really great people from that. And your name came up. He's like, oh, you got to talk to Libby about this free search.
That's so sweet of him.
Right. Yeah. And, at that point I didn't know what free search was.
Right.
It sounded intriguing. And then I got to go to a clinic with Harry Whitney,
Yeah.
just recently, and he was talking about the free search, and he didn't do a full one because
Right.
evidently
Because
they
it
can
takes
go
time.
on. Yes, but
Yes.
he did kind of small explorations of
Yeah.
it, and I loved what he was sharing. And he also said, "Oh, you've got to talk to Libby because
Yeah.
you evidently dove in
I
deep
did.
to
I
this."
did.
Okay,
I did a
so
deep dive.
cool. So can you tell us a little bit about what it is, and then we'll go further into
Yeah.
how it influenced your horsemanship?
Sure. Sure. Well, a free search is the idea is when it was introduced to me from Harry, he presented it as being particularly important for people to see.
Okay.
And he didn't talk so much about the value for the horse because people don't realize how in a horse it is to figure things out. It's they will search, they will try, they will experiment a lot, and they can be pretty creative and they can be pretty uncreative. But Harry presented it as it was good for people to learn that. People don't give horses enough credit for being able to figure things out.
Right. Okay.
So I was all on board with that idea and wanted to learn more. So I did a deep dive in. He did a few. I got to spend a lot of time at Harry's. I drove out for 2 winters for 5 weeks and did as many clinics as I could get into.
Wonderful.
And then I ended up leaving my home, divorced, blah, blah, blah. Went out, got to work for Joe Walter for a year, almost a year. And then I went to Harry's and spent 3 full years at his place. So while he was there teaching, I was there training horses. And so I got to watch as much as I could possibly watch. And then the rest, when he was gone, I was just taking care of the property and training horses. And
is this at his place in Arizona?
Yeah, he's
okay.
Since sold it, but
right.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
So I began. So I did a lot of searches out there, and then I got to do a lot of searches at a farm that I was working in California too, and then I've incorporated into my clinics. But I should just tell you about one. Would that help?
That'd be great.
So my first personal free search I did in Arizona with a horse that came in for training that was a Rocky Mountain horse and had been shown a lot and had been very successful at that. But as a result of that was rather shut down. And so I thought, well, good, I'll get in here and I'll try this out. It'll take, half an hour or so and it'll be really interesting, right? So it's 100 degrees outside, blazing sun, Salome, Arizona, in a round pen with sand. And I get her in, I bring her in and I stand there and she stands in one spot and hyperventilates for probably 20 minutes.
Wow.
And I'm like, pretty soon she's going to do something else. So I realized pretty early in that I was too much presence just standing there. So I sat down on the ground and I started drawing circles, building little sand castles and stuff in the round pen. And she still, nothing. She was focused on me, like hyper vigilant, and then would kind of go internal, and then she'd look at me again, and then she'd go internal. So finally, I made enough of a commotion that she popped her eyes open and bugged them out and took a canter a quarter of the way around the pen and stopped and turned in and hyperventilated for another 20 minutes.
Wow.
More. I didn't have a clock. So I spent a lot of time just kind of drawing hieroglyphics in the sand and trying to be as non-present, have as little as presence as I could possibly think of. And the rule of thumb for the search is when you think the horse is no longer trying or thinking or searching, or there's a very strong pattern shows up, that's when you make a commotion enough so that they try something, they do something. Okay. So I waited, long time, and then I made enough of a commotion and she cantered back to the same spot that she had started in. And we did this for 2 hours.
Wow.
And
And what was the goal of that free search? What were
for
you
her,
wanting
well,
her
my image was for her to be able to look me up, to come in
Okay.
to me. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my idea.
Okay.
So Harry was packing for his trip, and
Mhm.
he evidently had noticed that I was out there sitting in the round pen. And he came out and said, "Are you thirsty?" Brought me a big jug of water. And I
Uh-huh.
was like, "Oh, thank you." And we chatted for a little bit, and then he left. And so I began to interrupt those two spots because those were the only two things she dared to try.
Okay.
And so I stopped letting it last very long. So
Mhm.
she'd come over to the first spot, and I'd just make a little flop, and she'd run to the second one, and back and forth, and back and forth. And when she realized that neither one of those were working, she flat panicked and started to run hysterically around the pen. I was like, oh
Wow.
my gosh, she's going to break a leg. I was like,
Right.
what have I done? What have I done?
Right.
But then she didn't, and she stopped in a different place, but she didn't face me. She just stopped in a different place, kind of looking out towards her pasture. And so I left that alone for a long time.
Because it was
Okay,
something different.
it was something different. She tried something different.
Right.
And then after a while, I kind of started again, and she went back to her first spot. So I let that last because at least there'd been some change, and
Right.
I waited, and then I interrupted that. And this went on for the whole search, ended up about 4 hours.
Wow.
And she only tried about 5 things, which is
Interesting.
very little for a horse.
Right.
But she began to look softer in her try. She began to realize that she wasn't in trouble for not knowing.
Right.
And I wouldn't leave her very long in each spot, but she would go ahead and dare to try one of her 5 things, and she just kept trying those 5 things. And finally, I was thinking, well, maybe this is as good as it's going to get, like, how long do I stay out here?
Right.
And she just picked up her head, looked right at me, and walked a quarter circle and turned so that her tail was to her pasture, and walked into me with her head down, swinging soft, eyes soft, real slow, and stopped right in front of me. I
Wow.
started to bawl,
I
of
bet.
course.
Yeah.
And I put her halter on, and I just let her out as calmly as I could and put her back out in pasture.
Do you think it had anything to do with you letting go of, like, when you finally said, maybe this is enough? I can.
Not because I had many moments like that throughout the
Okay.
search. So it wouldn't have been that one.
Okay.
Yeah. No, she finally just realized that I was not a threat.
Wow.
That's how. But the interesting thing about that particular mare is I ended up being friends and working out of the farm of the lady that owned that horse. And that horse lived about 5 more years, and then she died. But from that day on, anybody walking the pasture, she would lock eyes on them and walk to them.
Interesting. So she learned that
she was like, this is great. And then she'd get, attention and whatever.
Right.
And so because she wasn't afraid of people, she was afraid of the interaction and the expectations of being with people.
Yes. Yeah. I have horses like that.
Yeah.
So let's take a step back. And for, a lot of folks that will be watching or listening to this, they won't have ever heard of or seen a free search. How would you define it? Like, what is a free search?
A free search is an opportunity to find out that in the presence of a human, they can try things.
That's great. That's great. So the person goes into it with some kind of an idea. It can be anything, right? It can be to come to them, like you talked about with this mare. It could be go to a cone and put your foot on. It could be anything, right?
Anything.
And then share a little bit about what happens. Like, from my background, the person would always direct the horse to the thing, right?
Right.
And like you said with Harry, I thought that was so interesting that you said that he shared the free search, not for the horse, but for the people to understand that horses are thinkers, they're problem solvers, and
Right.
we often get in the way with all of our micromanaging.
Exactly.
So even that direction is taken out, right?
That's exactly right.
So lead us through, like, so if you were going to ask a horse to, well, like, to come to you, what do you do to ask them?
I don't do anything to ask them. I'm not asking them to come to me. I have the thought that that would be what my solution is.
Okay.
But I'm just asking them, I'm allowing them to try something. So I have to make a commotion, right?
Okay. So
sometimes
try something.
Right. So sometimes, Harry would give a person a flag, sometimes, a rope, sometimes, and usually he'd put them in a chair facing the opposite of whatever it is they want.
Oh, wow.
So I've seen him do them with trailer, for trailer loading. I've seen, I got to be in the pen for one. I'd been doing quite a few searches. And so I said to him, I will do this, sir. I'll be the person in the pen if you'll direct it. Because I was curious if my timing was similar to his timing in terms of when to go ahead and flop the flag or whatever, to say, horse,
Sure.
You got to think,
Right.
like go think.
Right.
And so that was fun. And that was a thoroughbred who didn't like tarps. So we set a tarp up on one end of the round pen. And I was facing the opposite way from that. And I think that was a very short search. And I just flopped the flag just a couple of times to get her to try stuff. And she had only a few options on her plate before she knew, but she knew. Mm-hmm. She knew what we wanted when we walked in there, because her owner had been trying to teach her to stand on a tarp. Right. So she was like, oh, great.
Right.
So she had to have a few mad fits and run around and bucket kick. And she had a couple of spots in the pen that she would go and stand. And then within 20 minutes, I flopped the flag, and she was standing in the spot that she had made a pattern out of. And she just looked at me and then cantered in this pretty little we around the pen and jumped into the middle of the tarp, stopped dead, turned her head and looked at me. Wow. we just all cracked up.
Wow.
She knew just exactly what was going on.
That's really amazing. So talk a little bit about, so you're causing some commotion with, it doesn't matter what, it could
as little as possible.
As little
as possible to motivate them to leave whatever it is that they are doing, which is usually standing there doing nothing and taking a nap.
Okay. So to start
hyperventilating or something. But if you see patterns shaping up, so some horses will run to one spot, spin around, and run to another spot, spin around, and go back and forth and back and forth. And so the idea is if you think you should do something, wait longer.
Oh.
And then you begin, because it's amazing how many times a horse will go back and forth and back and forth. They have this idea, canter back and forth, spin around, blah, da, 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 and you're thinking, they're never going to come up with something else. I've got to flop the flag. And then they do something else.
Oh, that's really good. So if you think you need to do something, don't wait
longer.
Just observe, wait longer. So if they're just standing there and they're not really trying something, you're going to do as little as it takes to motivate them to try something.
Or you're going to wait longer.
Okay. Yes. So there's a lot of experimentation here for the human.
A lot of waiting.
Okay.
The thing that I always encourage people is wait longer. I mean, really, really wait longer.
Okay.
So then, beyond what you can stand, when you're sitting there, like you're dying to do something, that's definitely the time to wait.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Oh boy. Okay. So this is going to be really interesting. And my goal here isn't necessarily to like set it up where we're teaching this, but I think people I think people will be intrigued by this. And I think a lot of the people that are watching and listening have done things that are similar to this.
Sure,
Maybe they've played at Liberty,
sure.
sending a horse to something so I think this will be really good to give some ideas of what somebody could do if they wanted to try this out. Because I definitely am intrigued and want to explore with this.
Yeah.
So you're asking the horse, like, let's say with the tarp, or excuse me, I'm even using the word asking, and you said you're not asking. So really, are you just asking? You're asking them to try something. So there is an ask there. It's just not go to the tarp.
When you make a commotion, you're saying to them, what you're doing isn't the answer.
Okay. So it's kind of like that game when we were kids, and I think there's different names for it, but the hot and cold game.
Yes, but the difference is you're not telling them when they're cold. And you're not telling them when they're hot.
Oh,
you're just letting them try it.
Okay, but then how do you end? How do they know
they answer it? I do not know. They are smarter than humans. There's no doubt.
But there's something that we're conveying when they don't, then they haven't found the answer yet. Because like you said, when you're adding some commotion, you're saying what you're doing is not the answer. So there is something there. But then when they find it, I mean, obviously we're gonna be excited.
Well, they know our excitement oftentimes, depending on the horse, is not a good thing. That excitement is a commotion and makes it a bad thing.
Okay.
So the horses are seeking the place of zero pressure. Always.
Okay.
That's all they want is no pressure. They want none.
Right.
From us. That is the biggest reward we can give them. So when they find it, they get to leave the pen.
Okay.
So one of the things, well, I shouldn't even say this because this is one of the things that should be discovered. But one of the big discoveries is how much pressure we are just by having them in a pen. That can be a little depressing.
Interesting. Which is what you discovered with the mare that you told the story about, your first free search. Right? Just being in there.
My presence was so big for her. Just standing there and being in around corral away from her friends.
Right. Oh, so interesting.
Yeah.
So how did this, like you said, most people probably didn't dive in like you did with this free search.
I had an opportunity. Was working out of a farm with a bunch of horses, and then I was teaching, and people were curious, and so I tried it.
It's wonderful, and you had access to Harry. I mean, it was the perfect storm of learning.
Yeah.
So, how did it change? Because I think Harry had said that he talked to you not too long ago, and you'd said that you're not actually doing free searches anymore, but it changed you.
It did.
So
it absolutely changed me.
How did it change you?
Well, one of the things that I love about this horsemanship is the idea that we're setting it up to be the horse's idea. Okay.
Yes.
That's a wonderful thought. But what does that really look like?
Yes.
So when I worked for Joe Walter, he's one of my great mentors as well. And he is I think of all the people that I have seen work personally, he is the most honest to the horse is always searching. He is always leaving room for the horse to find stuff in his presentation. And I watched him do it all the time though when I worked for him. And I'm like, I don't know how this happens. I mean, this is, I can see that something major is happening here, but I cannot find it. I can't find it in my work of trying to work for him. And so when Harry, and I had already been introduced to free searches at that point, but I hadn't started my deep dive. So what the free searches gave me and why I tried as many horses as I could put my hands on is so that I could start to really understand the difference between a horse that's afraid to try and a horse that will try and try and try and try, but not necessarily where you want them to try.
Right.
Versus the horse who's just trying their guts out every second to be ahead of the pressure and ahead of what you're trying to teach them, and won't even wait long enough to hear you to know, so there's like this, all horses are different.
Right.
So to learn how to honor setting up a search within everything that you're doing. So it's not a free search. It becomes a directed search, but a directed search is a demand if you don't understand what a horse will give if you stay out of the way.
Oh, wow. That just gave me chills. So, oh boy, how could we help people? Because those words are beautiful, and I think they're going to resonate with people. But then you go, okay, but how do I do that? Right. And I realized that you spent years with that question. How do I do this? You're watching Joe, you're watching Harry. You still do.
I mean,
oh my God.
I think that it is a human condition to not do that.
I think it is too. I think we're very much direct line,
totally.
Shortest path.
Yes. And so it's a constant process to try to stay open enough to allow that room, but not so open that the horses don't think you have anything to say.
Right. Or
that happened to me too.
Okay.
I did a whole bunch of free searches, and then I'm waiting and finally realized, well, this horse just doesn't give a rip.
Right.
He's not worried. He doesn't mind being in the pen with me. He's I had several of them lay down, take a nap. Which was wonderful. It's like, wow, look at that horse doesn't ever lay down. He's just taking a nap.
Right. But with that concept that you just shared of, if you're feeling like you should do something, don't do anything.
Right.
Then you're just sitting there with a napping horse. Yeah.
Exactly. Which was wonderful.
Yes.
That was wonderful that happened to me several times, because it made me realize, okay, so they can feel comfortable in your presence in a pen.
Right.
And they can be okay to do absolutely nothing.
Right. But then if you do want to accomplish some things, there's got to be
a little motivation.
Yeah. So going back to what you were saying about that, if there isn't, and I'm not going to say it as eloquently as you did, but if there isn't a search in what you're offering, it's a demand. If you're directing the horse without room for them to explore, it's a demand. I'm thinking in my mind, a lot of the times what I've done to keep myself in an open, allowing frame of mind is I will ask a question. Like, can you step over here? Right. And then my brain is more open to looking for if they're answering it. It's a conversation.
Yes.
Are there things that you do when you teach people to help them stay in that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And just like you said, I'll say, could you, would you, to ask a question instead of state you're going to do this, because that changes us. The energy is different.
Right. And then if you ask the question and the horse does the opposite,
then you're in the conversation.
Aha, good. Yeah. Good. That's
so great. They're trying something, right?
Yes.
So depending on the horse's knowledge, the horse's understanding, their fear levels, all of that, you decide, okay, you tried that. You might let that work for a little bit and then block it slightly. So that they say, no, you got to think of something else.
Right.
Or you might say, hey, that's not going to work.
Right.
Let that go.
Right.
So then that becomes more of a directed search.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, very, very intriguing. Is there anything else that you would want to share about that? I know that, we could probably talk for hours and turn this into a whole workshop but is there anything else that you think of that the changes that happened for you in doing the free search?
It was well worth it to me to do as much as I did, because with a few horses, I began to see a pattern that of how long they'd wait, how scared they were, what kind of temperament they might have. But then as I kept going, I realized that it was a lot more varied than I had perceived. And that horses aren't just okay or not okay. They're okay about this, but not about that. And so
Right.
you might be able to really direct them and help them here and be able to say quite a bit. But over here, you got to open it up. And it might be all within 1 5-minute conversation that a couple of things are you can be right in there helping them with. And this other thing, you better give them room or they're going to not own it with a confident feel.
Oh, that's really good. And then did you take this into your teaching? I know
Yeah.
you did. How could you not, right?
Yeah.
But did you lead, like, did you have workshops or clinics that had this as a component?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And do you still do that, or
not as much?
Not as
because
much.
it takes a lot of time. So my clinics, my favorite clinics are modeled after Harry's 5-day clinics. They only have 6 participants.
Yes.
And you're there for 5 days together, which is a lot of time to get to really dig into stuff.
Mhm.
But you think about the first horse I did, which took 4 hours. Most searches took around 2.
Okay.
Some were short, rarely. So if you take a day, you have people there paying for a 5-day clinic,
Right.
and you do a search, that may mean that out of 6 people, 1 horse gets a whole half a day or more.
Right.
And if somebody else wants to do one, then only 2 or 3 horses get work that day. And so it becomes challenging. So the whole group needs to want the benefit of watching one. And so where I go now, well, the searches that I did in the earlier days of my clinic teaching, we would come across horses who were really a deep, deep mess.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd talk about it, and the group would decide they'd really be interested in watching. And those horses were worth watching. And those people, that was very emotional times, because those were horses who had shut down, who had tremendous fear, but not always. Like, I had one lady who did one later on after I had kind of stopped doing very many free searches, and she just had an old steady Eddie who was kind of a good citizen, and she just felt like he didn't care about her.
Yeah.
She was really curious. She'd seen a lot of searches. She's ridden with Harry a whole bunch, and she'd done searches with me, and she just wanted to see.
Yeah.
And so we plopped her in a chair in the round pen, and it was surprisingly stressful for him.
I bet.
But when he finally came over, it changed their relationship.
Oh, yeah, that's really great. But I understand what you're saying. How do you do that in a group environment?
Right. Right.
So yeah, that's really great. So we're going to switch gears just a little bit.
Sure, you bet.
So along the lines of teaching people, which you've done since the age of 14. Yeah, since you were born, 6 years old, you're like, I'm going to be a professional. So I think that we all observe certain obstacles that can get in the way of people's learning or progress. And in your experience, what's something that you've seen that gets in the way, and what could you share that could help people with that?
Fear.
And
not just fear of the horse, fear of looking stupid, fear of not knowing, fear of being wrong. Fear, it's the same as the horses, really. We're just living beings who are trying to get along and find relief.
Yeah.
So I try to set up a safe environment. I do push people pretty hard. I mean, I don't give people very many free searches, but I do that because I feel like people really can learn, and their confidence comes from success. So yes. I try not to push where it's not going to work, but I will really push people to to find a feeling that is going to help.
Mhm.
So I'm not the softest teacher, but I think if you asked my students, you'd say they would say that I'm fair and they feel supported.
Yeah, I would guess so.
Yeah.
So what if someone heard you say that fear and
Yeah.
it gave them, goosebumps? What's something that you found that can help? I know that's a huge topic,
Well,
but
you have to unwind how to find a place to start that isn't too deep into that fear.
yes.
And that can be a challenge because sometimes the horse almost can't do it for them.
Mhm.
And so those are my biggest challenges when we have someone who's and it doesn't mean that they aren't capable. I've had people who are actually quite capable, but their fear stops them from being able to use that. And I haven't suffered terribly from fear, but I did raise 5 Holsteiners, and some of them pretty big, moving,
Yeah.
strong-minded things. And I got humbled several
Yeah.
times about
Right.
whether or not I was really as brave as I thought I was. And so that helped me because I'd always been a strong seat and get to ride all the horses that people couldn't ride. So I was
Right.
full of myself for a little while.
Yeah.
And then and then I got a little bit humbled about fear.
Right.
And it helped. That gave me a little bit more compassion. I think I used to push too hard on people with fear.
Oh,
You have to, they're just like the horses. You have to find a place to start
mhm.
that you can start to build on. And if it's too deep into the fear, it's not going to work.
So finding a place that doesn't maybe isn't completely without fear, or do you encourage people to look for something that you can do with your horses that doesn't bring up any fear response?
Well, it depends on the person.
Sure.
Depends on the horse they're with and what their fear is about.
Right.
So that's not really an answer to that. And I don't have a set thing that I do. I'm
Sure.
always really trying to work right in with the person and the horse and see what that combination could do.
Right.
It might start a little piece of success for the two of them.
Right. But I think that concept, even though I appreciate what you're saying, that, there isn't a 3-step formula and follow this and it'll work for everybody, right? But that concept of, so many of us in the horse world here ride through it, push through it, all that kind of mentality, and hearing, wait a minute, find the edge, right? Find where you're not fearful and build from there.
There's another part of fear that is almost as big as being afraid of the horse, and that is fear of being wrong.
Yes.
For people. And so, we navigate how to realize that we're just gonna be wrong.
Right.
We can't be learners and not be wrong.
Right.
And so we try to navigate that quite often too.
Yeah. And I think that it's so helpful. Like, as I've interviewed, quite a few folks now, that has come up, that idea of making mistakes, being wrong, that it's so much a part of it. And once you see that and kind of embrace it, it can change everything.
Yeah.
I think that that's something that maybe it's just me, but I think it's beyond just me, that I think we all need to hear that again and again and again, because
live it. Which is where I like to try to help people get to, is that we just live it together.
Yes.
And that none of us are going to be right. Truth is, we're really right only once in a while.
Right.
The time with the horses, we're just mucking around somewhere close enough to get things going.
Yeah.
But we all know those magic moments.
Yes. It's what keeps us in the game.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Okay. So I think that's super helpful. And then how about for you in your journey? Can you think of a time where you were, either struggling to learn something or maybe struggling to stay in the game, or, that you could
Like
share
every
with us?
day.
Like every day? Yeah. Yesterday.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a constant if you're a searcher, which I am, I'm
Yeah.
searching all the time to be better and know more and understand better. And then I find out that something I studied and studied and studied and learned, I don't agree with anymore. And now I'm trying to learn this over here. And so that's just a constant process for me. But I do remember, I have one little story that I think you'll enjoy is when I first was at Harry's for the 3 years. And it was my first summer. And one of my very dearest friends at the time who I'd met at Harry's sent me his horse, his big warm blood horse in training. And so I was like, okay, this is great, and I could not get one thing positive done with that horse. And I'd had him for like 3 weeks and I was getting nowhere. And I thought, here I am taking money from my friend. Right. And I'm supposedly a trainer and I cannot do squat of value here. And I remember the moment because I was in Harry's round pen and I had set up a little puzzle. He was a bit of a claustrophobic guy. And so I had put a barrel up so that he could just go between the fence and the barrel, right? No big deal. No, absolutely not. And I'm, trying to be feely and open like searches, and I'm failing and I'm trying to drive him through, and that just is the worst. Mm-hmm. And I remember I had a lariat in my hand and I turned around away from him and I threw it on the ground and I started to bawl. I just started crying like, I'm no good. I can't do anything. I'm stealing my friend's money. I had this complete pity fit. And in the middle of my stomping feet, pity fit, this little teeny idea starts wafting in. And I sucked in a big breath and whimpered out, and I turned around and I looked at him and I just started in with a totally different feeling, went right through. That's like, okay.
Interesting.
Okay, you're just in your own way.
Right.
Because I was trying to do something.
Right.
Instead of try to have a conversation with the horse. I was trying to do something. I was trying to get something done for the person.
Yes. Which makes me think about, I think a lot of times we'll have a session with our horse and it is a conversation, and it's one of those moments that we were just referring to that keep us in the game. Like maybe we did something right, or we understood each other. And then oftentimes I found that the next day is not so good, right? Yes. Because we go in wanting to have that same thing.
That's right.
Right.
And I often take the next day off.
Ooh, that's really good. That's really good. So it's kind of like what happened for you with this warm blood was in reverse. Like you went in with that feeling of wanting to get this thing done and had to kind of have a breakdown of all that stuff and let it all out.
I'll just give him his money back.
Right. And then you were able to come at it in a completely different way, and it worked.
I became present.
Yeah. Okay.
I became present at that moment.
Okay.
Once I gave myself permission to give him his money back, in comes an idea. Yeah. Okay, now I'm in the moment. Now I'm creative again. Now I'm thinking, and I'm not just trying to get something done.
So do you find that for people, or maybe yourself, like in this situation, it was just kind of this breakdown, which I've had so many of them. And usually it's the night I put my horse up and I get back in the house and I'm just like, like, I've made such a mistake or whatever. And then overnight I'll come up with a new idea because I start to ask the question differently.
Yeah.
And it's I'm humbled. I'm coming from it in a more humble place. Do you find, do you encourage people, if you get to that place where nothing's working, just get out of there and take a break or go have a fit?
Yeah. I mean, it's just normal. It's just what happens.
Totally. Yeah.
And it's okay.
Yeah. That's really good. It's really, really good. I think it's so important for us to it's a big reason why I'm doing this podcast is
Mhm.
because throughout my journey, I have always been curious about other people. Like I ask questions and how did you get through this? Just like what I'm doing with you.
Yeah.
And I've found so much richness for my own journey. And I have also found that a lot of people don't have the opportunity or they don't take the opportunity to do that, to ask,
Yeah.
to be nosy and
Yeah.
ask the questions. So I feel like that's part of why I'm doing this, is so that other people can hear somebody like you that's been doing it your whole life say, it's part of the deal. It's
It is.
just the way it works, you know? And I think that's so powerful and so important. So really great. What's something that you're excited about in your horsemanship these
Oh,
days?
what am I not excited about in my horsemanship these days? Yes,
So
I'm always trying to learn. And of course, I need several lifetimes. I keep saying, can I have all of the time for the people who are bored? And that maybe I would have half as much time as I wish I could have. So I know I'm greedy and I know that that's not fair, but I'm still will forever be on this journey of trying to learn how to have the horse feel like a really willing participant and thinker, and to not make things happen, and to really set it up to be the horse's idea. I will never run out of struggling and trying on that. But I'm also trying to learn a little bit more about biomechanics now, and soundness, and that I'm having some trouble with my mare, who fell 3 times last winter in the ice.
Ooh,
So that's sent me on a journey of that kind of health too. So,
right. Well, that's exciting.
and everything I learn, I end up sharing. So
That's great. And your
that's how
students,
it goes.
I'm sure your students love that about you.
And they teach me too, because as you know, we can't know everything. And so I have lots of students who are really far along in some areas that I'm pretty weak. And I'm always saying, now, what was that you taught me yesterday?
Right. That's great.
Yeah.
That's really good. So it makes me think back to what you were talking about early on when you were first kind of exploring, well, not when you were first exploring the idea of doing it professionally, but when you were 16 at
Yep.
Michael
Yes.
Poulin
Yeah. Yeah.
at his barn, thinking about, I don't want to burn out. I want to,
I want to
and
love it forever.
yeah, and you have been so successful with that.
Yeah.
And yet you're not working at a office anymore. Like, so
Oh
you're
no, I gave that up at 35.
okay.
I
So
did a
you're
bunch of jobs until I was
okay.
35, and then I went out on my own.
Okay. So now you're doing this pretty much full time,
Yep.
right?
My only job.
Then my one of my last questions will be, how have you kept this enthusiasm that is so apparent as you're
Oh,
talking? I
thank
can
you.
feel
That's
it.
sweet of you.
How have you kept from burning out?
Because I stay varied in what
Okay.
where and how I'm working, and um I have a home that is not a business. That was very important to me. I knew from working in big barns that that was never going to work for me. I need my own downtime, private time, and I need private time with the horses that I'm working with. So I've built that into my lifestyle. I did get to travel for 10 years, working at both Joe's and Harry's, and then traveling back and forth from San Diego, which I had a wonderful farm I was working out of there. And I was lucky enough to live an hour from Franny Burridge and Piper Ridge Farm.
Oh,
And so
okay.
she brought all the really incredible people, Ray Hunt,
Oh,
Chuck
wow.
Brandeman, Joe Walter, Brian Newbert, Harry Whitney, to her place. That's how I
Okay.
got introduced to all of this stuff. And so I got to work out of her farm for 5, well, I still do, but for
Mhm.
5 summers I was living there, and then being in San Diego. So I was traveling back and forth. And then my parents passed away, and so I got a house. And so now I have a place to call my own, and then I
Mhm.
travel and do do clinics, and I'm doing virtual work now. I
Oh,
work with
neat.
people all over the country. They
Wonderful.
put AirPods on and set up a camera, and away we
Isn't that
go
amazing?
live. Yeah, it's incredible.
Oh, that's
And
really neat.
so I fly for clinics, and I'm still doing a local network of people in the summer in this area, and then I'm gradually. So it's just I just piece it together.
Yeah, that's great. So you kept it, like you said, you've kept it varied, which for you is important. You've got a
Yep.
variety of things going
Yep.
on. And then I love what you said too about that you've set this really clear boundary for yourself that home is for me recharging. It's not
And
for
working with
business.
my horse.
Yes, and for you to be doing
Yeah.
your horses, being with your horses. That's so great. So that's wonderful. Very, very clear description of how you've kept from burning out.
And I keep learning.
And you keep learning.
I am always on a quest.
That's wonderful.
Always learning.
Love it. I love it. Well, this has been super fun and inspiring to talk to you. How can people learn about you that don't know about you and might want to learn with you? How can they do that?
Well, I have a website, libby@libbylyman.com.
Great.
And you can email me. And
wonderful.
Call me, whatever.
Okay. Okay, great. I'll make sure that your contact information, any contact information you want to share is in the show notes. So wonderful. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. It's been great.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.
Really
I mentioned at the very beginning of this podcast that Libby's enthusiasm for learning is contagious. I think you probably can see what I mean, and I hope some or lots of that enthusiasm has rubbed off on you. One of the things I love about getting to do these interviews is that although our experiences are all different, we all have this common element as learners, no matter how much experience we have. And there are things that learners go through. There are struggles, there are hardships, there are elations and figuring things out and things that keep us going. And being able to hear from somebody like Libby, who's been doing it for as long as she has, and the things that she's struggled with and how she's gotten through it, and the things that she's learned along the way, it's really inspiring to me. And I feel lucky to be able to share it with you. So keep going, keep learning, keep making mistakes, keep showing up, keep being inspired. And thank you for being here. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.